Hey everybody, good morning and welcome back to Reaper Pro Tips with me, your host and disembodied brain, Justin. We're just gonna say that it's a brain somewhere out there in the ether. I was going for brain today. How's everybody? How was your weekend? Looks like everyone is just giving finger hearts, finger hearts, finger hearts, finger hearts, finger hearts. Tiny finger hearts. Hello, hello, hello. Everybody's just like, hello, it's the week. All right, that's fair. That's fair. I feel the same. All right, let's see here. Let's go out. Let us grab our colors. I want to do... That's right, we were doing some blendies. Blendies. I liked the blendies on the underside of the wings. Let's work on the underside today. We were going to work on the underside last time, and then I got distracted by orange. Because orange. And so let's get our wolf gray, our Osirian sand, and our bleached linen out. And then let's get our red colors because we need them for our struts. So we need our mahogany brown and our orange brown. We don't need our Kraken ink yet. Rather wet for you, Jetter? We had the opposite of wet. Although I did get to go to Land's End and see immense fog. Fog that looked like smoke. It was so dense. It was like blowing in the wind in clouds. It was crazy. Microclimate for the win. Oh, good, Matt. I'm glad you like your ceramic palette. Sweet. Use it for good. Use your newfound powers for good. All right, let's see here. Boop. On the bubble wrap today. I kept the bubble wrap close at hand because I was intending to do so. And I think I did, yeah, I did paint that wolf gray, and then we did a little bit of blending, but I think I want to do a little bit more. Let's see here. I want to get closer, get our wyvern out of the way, get a little bit of focus in here. There. But yes, if you've been looking for a palette with smaller wells that keeps your paint wet a little bit better, this is the baby you want. And yeah. As always, I do recommend using both, trying both wet palette and well palette, just because you never know which one is going to be better for your style and which one's going to appeal to you more. So you should give both a chance. Just to understand kind of what each is good at. If you are using a wet palette, but you are having trouble with nailing paint consistency for various techniques, I do recommend trying the well until you get a handle on that stuff. The well lets you be really consistent in your mixes, so you can get a feel for that, and then you can go back to the wet palette and have less of a fight. And if you really like a little bit of a thicker paint style that's more painterly with a little more texture, and you want to move faster, and you don't want to have to worry about your paint staying wet on a surface, then the wet palette is very good for that. So, but if you use a lot of thinned paint applications like I do, and you want to be really precise with that stuff, then I think the well is a little bit more of an advantage there. Whoa, a day off, Rax. Did they allow you to have days off? Hello, Bob and Julie. It's good to see you. All right, let's see here. Now I need my reds and oranges. Reds and oranges. Notice how fiery this guy looks, guys, even though we're not using like a straight up red and orange. Like we're using, you know, a burnt orange, really, and a reddish brown or a brownish red. But it still looks very fiery, which is kind of like gives you guys an idea. You don't have to use really bright colors to get certain effects. All right, Inara, what happened? Weird paint reactions are my forte. I would like some rain, Shadow Raven. You can send it to me. I miss rain. I would like a nice rainy day. There. Was using brush-on sealer to smooth a figure and mixed in a drop of brush-on primer. Oh, yeah, don't. Well, okay. I wouldn't have known about that reaction, but in general, what you want to thin primers with are primers. Regular paint does go in there, but it sounds like you had a very bad... Was it clumpy? Did it go clumpy on you? Stringy? Yep, yeah, so that's a chemical reaction. Precipitate reaction is what it's called. Essentially, you have crossed the streams, Inara, and instead of blowing a hole in the universe, you got cottage cheese. Which is much better than blowing a hole in the universe. But yeah, so what you're dealing with is when you're dealing with different things that are not just paint colors. Like when you're dealing with paint, like regular paint, not special effects or sealers or primers or coatings that are meant to do something specific effect. This stuff is made to be extremely neutral pH wise, and it's meant to go with a lot of different additives and stuff. It's really, really meant to go with a very wide range. But with primer, you're dealing with something that is definitely not paint, chemically speaking, and probably has a higher or a more acidic pH. And with sealer, you're dealing with something that, again, is a little bit different chemically. And so you're probably dealing with two items because they're not meant to just be paint, right? They're meant to do specific effects. And so they're probably at opposite ends of the pH scale. And so when you mix that, it doesn't just normalize it. It actually causes a reaction because they don't go together well. So yeah, well, I would have definitely added some white paint. White paint and sealer is going to be fine. Any paint and sealer is going to be fine. And you can also mix paint with primer because paint is in the middle of that scale. So paint will be pretty friendly to either one. But yeah, I generally make it practice not to mix any two, like, I guess coatings that aren't just paint, like things that are meant to do specific effects. I tend not to mix those because I know full well that like they can be very different chemically. And when you've got that, you never know how it's going to react. The primer got weird because you're dealing with... Primer has chemicals in it that are completely different from anything you're going to find in sealer. Like, remember, primer is meant to actually micro-etch the surface of things in order to cling to it. So you're likely dealing with a very acidic emulsion. And when you cross pH is so important in paint, in getting paint to work. And so when you go too far, when you mix two things that are too distant, that's when you get that precipitous because they're not going to work together and they just like scream and like fling themselves around. It's they really don't like it. Like we even had to work around this with some of our products where we were told, no, you can't use that pigment with this base because they're just too different chemically. You're going to get a reaction. It's probably not going to be stable. So, I mean, it is chemistry. You guys think it's just paint, but even though it's water-based paint and you think of it as the friendliest little emulsion on the planet, you do have pH and you know, acidity and basic and all that sort of thing. Water usually not. I mean, you will see it sometimes if you have really heavy water, like old metal pipes. Back in the day, back like 20 years ago is when I heard about this, where a friend of mine in New York City always used distilled, or at the very least filtered water, because his pipes were like, he lived in Manhattan. So they were old pipes and he had a lot of heavy metals and, he had experienced a little bit of just not real great effects. And so he had switched. Now, he was also using a lot of water in his paint. He was thinning his paint like more than I've ever seen anybody thin their paint, even me. He was pretty much painting with glazes. So when your water is that big a factor and you've got very little paint involved, then you're definitely going to see it if it's there. But I have not heard about it anywhere else or anywhere since that water really makes so much of a difference. However, given that effect, he was a pretty famous painter at the time, Bobby Wong. given that that effect did pop up in a very small segment of the population, that's where you get today's recommendations to use distilled or filtered water with your paints just to cover your butt. Fact is that 99% of the country, you really don't have to worry about it. I mean, my parents have well water and they have to use like water softeners. But even with that, I have never had a problem painting at their house just using tap water. So that gives you an idea like how extreme your water has to be to really affect this. And again, I'm half suspecting that it was because Bobby thinned his paint to glaze level and just built up like 20 layers. He was the slowest painter I knew. But his models looked like he had painted them with a tiny airbrush. And I've never seen anything like it since. Hi, New Edsy. But yeah, so, I mean, my base gut feeling here is with the water, don't overreact. Like, I feel like a lot of people overreact. If you want to just switch to distilled or spring water or filtered water, whatever, okay, it's you. Do you. But I honestly, like I said, my parents have well water. They have to use a water softener. You know, their water's quite heavy, and I've never had a problem with their water when I'm painting at the old house. So I mean, your mileage may vary, check it out, but yeah, no, when you're dealing with primer and sealer, I'm just betting that you've got a very, very basic base, and that primer is very acidic because of what it has to do, and that you're just crossing the streams too extremely. And no, water isn't going to vary that much. Like, you could look it up online, like what pH level does tap water vary within, and you could probably find a decent, like assessment. But in general, if it's like, it's just, I've never seen it really happen these days, especially with so many like updated piping that, goes to plastics or whatever and is no longer the old, like kind of corroding metal and stuff like that. So, I mean, don't overthink it. But you definitely likely are dealing with two things on very opposite ends of the pH scale. When you see any of that cottage cheesing, that's usually what you're seeing, unless you're mixing something that isn't quite a pure water-based acrylic like the Tamiya, the Tamiya, I never know how to say it. But the Japanese paints that have their own thinner, even though they claim to be water-based acrylics, there you're probably also going to hit something. So when you mix something that may have slight solvent base that's unusual mixed with a regular water-based acrylic, you can get that cottage cheese effect, like I like to call it. But yeah, most often it's and I had an actual chemist explain this to me, by the way, so this isn't hearsay. This is actually he said that when you get a precipitate action like that, it is almost always a pH issue, and you have to figure out which way to adjust it if you're a chemist. So there you go, your morning paint chemistry. This is way too early in the week to be talking about precipitate actions in chemical emulsions. Yeah, sorry guys. Yeah, blame Inara. But yeah, pH important. pH actually probably the single most important thing in paint, because pH controls not only whether your emulsion sticks together nicely or falls out, but it also controls which pigments, like which the pH of like your compound and your emulsion will like determine which type of additives work best, which type of pigments work best. Like it's all tangled together, and it's all about pH. There's a lot of other stuff too, but I think, just like from my experience, that pH is probably the single most important thing. But it's not on a user level, it's not. But on a paint creation level, it is. So on the mad scientist level, pH is the most important thing. But for you guys, it's not. Because except for like what Inara ran into, it's really not something that you should ever run into if you're using standard hobby paint. Like they're all meant to, I mean, acrylic paint is acrylic paint is acrylic paint. Now you're asking me things that I didn't bother to go into, Pendrake. I am a functional user, so I am not a chemist. So I can't tell you what these compounds like are, what their molecular structures are, or whatever they blah, blah, blah. So asking me what glycol ether is, look it up. I would have looked it up. Paints are composed of a bunch of different stuff. So And it's, yeah. But what I don't want to do on the stream here, Pendrake, I'm gonna, you can look it up all you want, but like, let's not break down the like composition of paint, because that's just not what this stream is about. To be boring as blazes for most people. So I'm gonna make a request that we not do that on stream. Because honestly, most of it doesn't matter to you guys. It doesn't. Like, if you're curious about chemistry, then go for it. But a lot of this is the kind of thing where you learn a little and then you overthink a bunch of stuff because you don't realize how little it really matters for what you're doing. Like, it can be fun, like, kind of, trivia knowledge. But unless you're designing a paint line and experimenting with different lines of pigments and additives that you want to stay stable in a paint, like I did, it's not terribly useful for you. And dead raises with the complete, like, boring chemistry lesson of the day. Thanks. There's a lot of stuff that's commonly used in both paints and cleaners. You'd be amazed. Like surfactants. The same or very close to the same surfactants that you guys see in your dish soap making bubbles are similar to the surfactants used in paint. So cleaners and paint have a lot in common. And a lot uncommon. But again, more of a curiosity thing. Less of an actual pertinent to your painting thing, I'm afraid. Learning this stuff is fun and can completely impress and bore your friends. Yeah, actually, and glue is paint, too. Inara brings up an excellent point that she didn't mean to bring up. I was pretty much told that Elmer's glue and other white glues, PVC glues, they're paint. Like, they're the same structure in that is the same structure used in the base of most water-based acrylic paints. Like, with obviously the resins would be different. Like you load the resin into the one, and the other one it still has resins, but I have no idea what they're using. And it also has a couple of other chemicals in white glue, like an evaporant. But yeah. So yeah, there you go. This again was way too early in the week and way too early in the morning for most people. Who wants paint chemistry on Monday? Actually, not even me. Wee fun. But yeah, I'm pretty sure it was pH. And it's just something you just have to not mix those two things. I mean, a lot of people, back when Master Series first started out, we were using a different set of bases that later was discontinued. So we actually switched, and I think that was the best thing that could happen. But one set of bases we had actually did react with some golden paint products. Not the actual paint, but again, some of their stuff like sealers or additives. So it was obviously just a little bit too far on the pH scale, essentially. But since that old time, I've never heard of anything. A lot of people use golden products now with our paint, and they have no problems. So I'm going to get some pure white in here, just in case I want to be really, really, really bright. I doubt it, but you never know. Maybe I feel shiny today. Good to jumpstart the brain now and then. Yeah. I mean, I do like science, and I like learning about it, and it does keep your brain fresh to learn funky things. But I'm afraid for many people who may have like jumped into this stream in the middle of that, may have gone, oh my god, chemistry? I am out, and just left. Flashbacks to high school chem. All right, Wyvern, I'm moving your tag. There, tag. Out of there. I think we used a Syrian sand here with our orange to make our wet blend. We're going to use our big fat brush and do that. Just so we have a equal on both sides Wyvern. What do I want to do? This is a hard one because the body gets in the way of your brush moving naturally, so you kind of have to turn him. Because you definitely want to be pulling the paint out toward the edges of the wing. When you're doing a blend like this, and you're starting with your dark and you're blending out, definitely pull out toward the edge of the wing. So you can mix it in easily more and more light as you get toward the edge. I think it's very much more harder to start with this light color and try to blend in or glaze in the darks. I prefer to do it the other way around if you're wet blending. If you're just working with glazes, if like you're painting this pale color on and then glazing to darken this down, then you absolutely can do it the other way around. But if you're wet blending, go from the dark to the light or from the inner to the outer edge, in my opinion. Yep, that's what you're running into. And like I said, unless you cross the streams and mix like a primer with a sealer or, you know, something with a very different pH, you just got lucky. You found the only 2 products in Master Series that will react if you mix them together. Most likely. Alrighty, let's rock this. I think I'm going to start with some orange, actually. And we'll grab some red and blend that in. I think I'm going to work really fast today. Let's see here. I suppose glasses would help. If I actually want to paint things. Yeah, a lot of tomatoes is actually flammable. They have an alcohol that'll change everything. The minute you pop a solvent in there, you've changed things at a fundamental level. All right. So I'm piling the paint on here. This is pretty thick paint because I don't want it to dry since I'm working across this entire area. Now, I certainly, if I finish out these outside areas, I could just leave this to dry and then just go back in and add a new layer. But I kind of wanted to do all these guys at once. So I'm going to dab some of my mahogany brown, aka extremely reddish brown, into these areas. And the struts, of course, are going to be mahogany. So we are going to be adding a lot more of this, but we don't want these upper wing areas to be exactly the same color. A little lighter is nice. And then we can blend that down. I do have a lot of paint on my brush, so I have to question whether I want to actually rinse it out, and the answer is yes. Yes, in the purest sense of the word, Lord Nobody. But when we say water-based versus solvent-based, you're definitely dealing with paint terminology at that point. You do have to use the appropriate terminology for the science that you're working with. So yes, water is a solvent. Many materials are water-soluble. But in paint, when you are discussing water-soluble paint versus solvent-based, or water-based paint versus solvent-based paint is the proper terminology, you are definitely meaning a particular thing, even though water itself is also a solvent. So, and this is where people get confused from discipline to discipline, right? In that some disciplines, X is X, and in some disciplines, X is actually closer to Y. This is where different branches of science have trouble talking to each other sometimes. Oh, Kernico. 3D printed. Yeah, when those things get really thin, it can feel very brittle. You're right. All right, so I want to make sure I'm kind of looking the same on both sides. I could go a little darker on the other side. Now I've got very little paint on my brush. I started out with a lot of paint on my brush to lay down this layer so that I could get it to stay wet for a while and blend nicely. I did thin these paints, but it's like a 4-to-1 because when you're wet blending and you haven't laid down a base coat, you do need it thick enough to get a solid coat. Luckily, orange brown is such a high coverage orange that I don't really need to worry too much. Oh, too dark. Too dark. You have to be careful not to get your gradient too far down. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to leave this here, blend it out, because although I do need to blend it a little bit darker over here, I can always go in and glaze this down a little more once I've got my blend. What I mostly want is just that I have a good blend. So starting this out, never expect your wet blending to be perfect. You always expect to go back in and touch it up a little bit with layering and glazes to make it really good. But what wet blending does do is it gives you a great start on a blend so that you have very little additional work to do, especially in the actual transition area where it goes from dark to light and light to lighter. So you can get that nice blend set up. And then when you go back to fine tune it, you don't have to work as hard. Think of it as a labor saver. Yeah, Clavicus, you're an exception though. I mean, we if we talked paint chemistry all day, like we would get a small and limited audience of people who really adored it, and then but we'd also lose out on all the people who maybe just need paint tips and are scared of chemistry or have an adverse reaction to chemistry, have a chemistry allergy, which many people from their high school days, I'm sure, do have. That was not a class. The great irony of my existence, guys, is that was actually my least favorite science class. Chemistry. Mostly because it was a lot of memorizing formulas and differences in like molecular structures and stuff, and I was always like bored as blazes. I would have been happier if it was like a hands-on chemistry class where you were more like, saying, well, what difference does this make? Well, let's do some mixtures. And you did a bit of that. You did a bit of labs. But I don't have I don't know, they just weren't that interesting. At least in my school. This is the same irony with which we can go back to my early painting days where I loved watercolors and oils and hated acrylics. And now look at me. I'm stuck with all of the things that I didn't like in high school. Ash, this is my old, it's actually a beat up, you want to use a big kind of like destroyed brush. This is an Escoda. I think it's a 1 or a 0, but it's comparable in size to my Raphael one. But as you can see, it's got no tip left. This is a great brush for wet blending, especially on surfaces that are about this size. If this was a real dragon, like a big dragon, I would be using more like a giant flat. Like a big flat brush because of those big wings. But this little guy, the little Wyvern, he's a lot easier to blend just with a regular brush. So I purposefully am using a brush without a tip because I want blended effects. I don't want lines when I sit here and smush my paint together. When I endeavor to do my smooshing, I want my smooshing to not have like thin brush marks. So if I'm using a more rounded brush, like you could use, I think it's a filbert, right? Which one is the rounded tip? I always forget. Like I was a 2D artist and I still never can remember what makes a filbert different from a whatever. But like you could use a filbert, a flat, a chisel, depending on what you're doing and how big the area is. The important thing about wet blending is to choose a brush that is as big as you can get away with while still being able to reach the detail areas that you want to reach. Like, I still want to be able to kind of, like, bring this paint up a little bit toward the inside of the membrane, kind of creep it up there. So I need a brush with a tip that's small enough to do that, but also that's big enough to cover the area quickly. So all those things you're kind of looking at when you're choosing a brush for wet blending. Yeah, I think I'm okay with that. This could go a little lighter. And now when you're getting the outside of the wing is when you can get into real trouble. If you've loaded out your paint too strong, you're going to kind of get it doing weird kind of flowing action. You don't necessarily want that, so filbert or rounded, yeah. So for wet blending, filberts are probably going to be a very useful brush for you if you go to like just Hobby Lobby or Michael's or, pick up one of their... I would pick up a sable or at the very least a synthetic sable or a softer hair. You don't want a brush that's going to scrape the paint over the surface. It's really important to pay attention to like the texture of your brush, how soft or stiff it is, the snap or spring as they often call it with sables. When you're doing a soft blended effect like this, having a harsh brush or a stiff brush is a big detriment because it's going to want to scrape the paint thin and that creates brush strokes. So many things to think about if you're switching up your brush. That's why we use a lot of sables in miniature painting because most of the time we don't want that. And although a lot of people start out with Taklons, that's why when people want to get a little bit, better effect, we often will recommend going to sable, even if you don't go to the highest level sable. You can still do a lot with synthetics, and synthetics are getting a lot better these days, but they are generally a stiffer brush. So if you're trying to do a soft blend, they can fight you. That said, you can overcome anything with practice. I mean, there are people like Doc Faust who have only, Tony makes it a point of pride to only use synthetic, doesn't like sable. And that's totally like his thing, and he's very good with them. And so you can overcome, it's just like using craft paint. You can overcome any bias. You know, you can get good at using a tool that some other people maybe don't feel is ideal for the project. Like, but you can get good at it if you're like, you know, get experienced with it, learn its shortcomings, learn its pluses, you know. That's why I always say there's 60 zillion different ways to do this hobby, and never let anybody tell you you're doing it wrong, because the proof is in the results. But if you are trying to force something like that and you're not having good results and you're getting frustrated, that's when you start listening to other people and going, okay, well, maybe I should try moving to a natural hairbrush and see what difference it makes. I mean, when you're an artist, exploring is so worth it. Learning what is good for you is so worth it, especially early on in the process. But that said, you should also retry things later in your process, because there are some things you may not get value out of when you are a younger painter, a newer painter, you know, and then later on you try it and you're just like, oh, now I get this, right? So yeah. I mean, Wapple's a great example of, like, he inspires a lot of people to try oils on miniatures, which is awesome. It's like, it's the way miniatures used to be painted when everybody was painting toy soldiers. And you can do very different things with the oils and everything. But also, you know, like I said, try it out, but don't criticize yourself if you aren't getting, like, perfect results, you know. But you can make anything work, right? Yeah, and James is a great example of he can make anything work. That man is a pro on so many levels with 2D art that, you know, if you can make oil work on canvas, you can make oil work on miniatures. You just have to learn to, you know, refine, you know, the medium and your tools till you can do the effects you want on a very small surface. Now notice even some of my paint, it was thickly enough applied that you can still see parts of it are wet. Where it isn't wet is where I pulled it thin over the surface. But wherever it's pooling, this is dangerous now. When you see parts of it are dry and parts of it are wet, you never want to touch that. Because when you do brush paint over it, you're going to pull that wet paint right out of those crevices, and it's going to make holes, like divots, in your paint job. It's going to strip up paint. And that's never good. So we'll be very carefully laying down a new coat of orange here at the edge to do this particular blend. And then I can come back and just kind of blend that in with a little bit of layering afterwards. I'm not real worried about it. Yeah, you'll get different effects, Lord Nobody, depending on brand. And some people find that brands really, really vary and take a dislike to certain brands and a liking to others. In general, with Sable, what you get is what you pay. What you pay for is what you get. Like, quality is definitely affiliated with price, but there are some exceptions. Like, you can get some slightly cheaper Sables. Ooh, my Osirian sand is too thin. I thinned it that 2-to-1, and it's way thin. Gonna add a little bit more paint to that. Pardon me, guys. You can see it beat up on the surface there. That's 2-to-1 is a bit thin for a base coat over bones, even when I wash stuff. But yeah, so like Rosemary and Company does a more inexpensive Kolinsky sable, high grade sable. So does Reaper. And remember also that holding a point has something to do with your unloading and loading of your brush, and also with the thinness of your paint. So it's not just the brush. I forget which one of you it was who was having a big problem keeping their brush at a point until I told you how to unload it by turning your brush in a circle as you unload it. And then your brush kept a point, right? So there's things and stuff and usage and what you learn. But then there's also, you can definitely get a Kolinsky that's just poorly made. Like, for one reason or another, it has a flaw. That's a thing. So don't think it's just you. And during your course of, learning this hobby, you'll learn about this stuff and you'll be able to kind of judge, is this me or is this the brush? Right? If you are having great results with one brand of brushes and it's just this other brand that you're not having good luck with, then definitely probably not you. It's probably just something about that brand of brushes. So wet blend, wet blend, wet blend. I definitely need to pull this lighter down here at the bottoms, though. I may need to... have no idea what... I've never tried Lupri. Not familiar with that brand. Personally use Raphael and Da Vinci. And this, like, the part of the reason that this Escoda is so beat up is that I didn't like the tip and I didn't feel like it was holding well, and so I just used it for this kind of work, and I totally destroyed the tip on it just because it wasn't holding up to my usual standards. This is dicey, but we're going to try it anyway. Yeah, a little bit lighter. I just want a bit of light at the edges of these wings. But yeah, I mean, it really is down to what works for you. There's also a thing, although I don't know, I argue with other painters on this sometimes, but I do feel there's a breaking in period for me with brushes where the brush will be okay at the beginning, but will be like super much better once I've painted with it for a little while. So that's a thing for me, but it's not a thing for everybody. So paint style does matter, like how you treat your brushes, how often you rinse, do you use thick or thin paint with them, how often do you clean them, stuff like that. Maybe you can pawn the brushes you don't like off on somebody else who starts painting near you, Lupri, or Lord Nobody, rather. That's what I tend to do if I get something and I'm just like, you know what, this isn't for me. But maybe you could get some use out of it. Speak nicely to your brushes, yes. Invoke the paint gods. Speak nicely to your brushes. Sacrifices are mostly not necessary. Again, I just unloaded my brush, rinsed it out, came back with my damp brush. And this is a little bit dicey because I'm working over just straight bones. I didn't lay down a base coat first. So sometimes if you do this, you can actually strip up a little bit of paint. But I'm experienced enough with it that I can usually make it work if I'm really delicate. So again, this depends on what kind of painter you are. Like some people get into it with their painting and they have a more heavy hand that is just, you know, heavier style. And I tend to be real delicate with my brush work, so I get away with that where maybe I couldn't if I was a little more heavy-handed. Well, you can, I mean, keep looking if you haven't found, like, the perfect brush for you, Lord Nobody. But if you really like your Lupri and it works for you and you don't have a problem, you can do everything with it, then, yeah, I mean, try something new if you feel like it, but it's not necessary. I mean, I used the same Da Vinci Maestro series and size for over 2 decades of miniature painting because it was perfect for what I'm doing, and I still use that. I started using the Raphael just on a kind of a lark because I wanted to try using a bigger brush. Because if you are kind of stuck and like having trouble progressing in the hobby, or like, you know, you just want to switch it up, like it can be very valuable to switch to either a larger, significantly larger or significantly smaller brush. Like, you know, the little one here, relatively little, is the one that I mean, I used this for everything for 2 decades, all my competition painting, all my everything painting. And then I went to something that was significantly larger. And, you know, I learned a bit about, like, you know, how to work with the bigger brush, and it definitely has pluses and minuses. Likewise, in working recently, as you all know, I've started using tiny brush more. So the little 3/0 Da Vinci. And that, again, is you know, switches up your style a little bit, is better at some things, is worse at other things. So not even just using different series, but I used different sizes. And But in general, though, I would say... Oh, when you use more thinned paint, it loses its point. All right. I'm going to show you guys the tricks, and then you can try it again. So when you're using more thinned paint and you load up your brush, it's going to distend your point a little bit more. It's gonna make it go more not sharp. So here. Boop. Wyvern tag can go over here. So the way to repoint it when it's loaded with thin paint is to roll the brush kind of in your fingers, so you're turning it around in a circle as you're unloading it. This will naturally shape the tip. Not only will it unload the excess paint off the tip, but it will naturally shape the tip back to that needle point so that you can do what you need to do with your brush. So remember to unload extra and kind of roll the brush around in your fingers as you're doing that. And then you should come back to a point. Like, there is absolutely no reason for thinned paint to make your tip less good. Like, thin paint should make your tip better. You should actually have a better tip when you're using thin paint than thick paint. Because thick paint is goopy and viscous, and it, like, will naturally work to keep your brush from achieving its finest tip. So you should be able to use thin paint, and, like, your brush should be at its best, because it'll have enough viscosity with that thin paint to hold it together, but you can also take enough paint off to get that fine tip. So make sure you unload your brush, like, significantly. Remember when you're using thin paint, you need to unload more. So the couple of dabs to, like, kind of, you know, get the excess paint off your brush, the couple dabs you do with thicker paint, not enough for thinner paint. Go and watch Thinning MSP Paint, my video that I did for ReaperCon last year. It's free. It's on Reaper's YouTube. Quindy will probably be able to give us the link in a second. But I talk about that. I talk about when you use thin paint, you have to unload a lot more than you think in order to keep control. So give that a try and see if that helps. Because it's it may or may not be the answer, but it's definitely, like, something I see all the time. That is why you should always watch my stream, Thormel. Like, thin paint is my idiom to cross the streams and use language analogies for painting. I'm going to start putting these struts in a little bit. I am going to want to come back and kind of darken down the tops and lighten down the bottoms like I was doing on the other side. There's Quindy. Thank you, Quindy. But yeah, I talk about that. I talk about how you need to unload the brush more when you're using thinner paint. It'll give you better results. There's a lot of, like, micro information in mini painting, like little things you can do that heavily influence your success. And a lot of it is little tricks that painters, like, tend to, like, kind of pick this stuff up and do it without thinking about it. They just know that, you know, they kind of internalize that if I do this, then everything goes better, but they may not notice, like, what they're doing and why. Like, I had to seriously, like, microanalyze my own, what I was doing. Like, I sat down and really looked at how I was loading and unloading my brushes for different viscosities of paint. In order to kind of nail down that I did that. A lot of painters don't microanalyze their own style very much. But I've always found it very useful in teaching others, because the things that I do automatically are things that you guys won't know when you're new to the hobby. And they may not be the answer to your, you know, they may not be the solution to what you're running into, but they could be. And so I like to mention it, because you should always try everything. Kind of troubleshoot yourself. See, your mileage may vary, but you may learn something else very valuable about your paint, or your brush, or your style. Especially when you're learning. Like, so useful just to, like, experiment. And hey, it's a free video, so you don't even have to do anything other than go and absorb information. Who knows? Also, this is a good place for the Patreon plug, because I also did a video for my Patreon on unloading and loading your brush, where I go into this like super like close in and in detail. And my Patreon is patreon.com/paintingbig. And I have a lot of very useful stuff over there. That's one of the videos where I think it like every painter should have to watch it. Every painter could probably get value out of it. Like if maybe except for the really advanced people who have already deconstructed their own style. But especially if you're a new painter, it's stuff that nobody explains to you. Like what I've tried to kind of get nailed down in all of this is stuff that nobody explains to you. They kind of expect you to pick it up, but a lot of people won't talk about it. They won't talk about how to unload your brush. Like what? You know, they just want to know how to do this. You know, how do I paint OSL? But loading and unloading your brush, like the mechanical techniques at the heart of what you do, makes such a difference. And my whole goal is to keep you guys in the hobby, enjoying it and learning and not getting frustrated. Frustration is the enemy of mini painting. Or any like creative endeavor. And so the more I can save you guys from frustration and keep you excited about painting, the better I'm doing. That's a better job I'm doing as an instructor and a painter who likes to share. Like that is the goal. I want you guys to be able to paint stuff that makes you happy. No, that can happen with really thinned paint, Estrogene. Actually, I noticed it when I was using this color. What happened over here is I was getting a little bit of what we would call latexing microparticles. So essentially when you thin down a paint a lot, but then maybe it sits for a while, or you've been using it for a long time, you can get a little bit of dried paint around the edge here. And so what that is it's kind of sticky and goopy. And when you load up your brush, let's see if I can get it to do it again. And then you unload it. As you scrape your brush off over the edge here, you can pick up some of those little particles that maybe were a little bit goopier. Maybe they were partially dried around the edges. And you'll sometimes pick those up and you'll see them at the tip of the brush kind of dry. The other way you can see it, there's a couple of them, little tiny particles. And that just means probably you either want to remix your paint, or you definitely want to thin it down, mix it all in, so you're not picking up any of that stuff at the edges. Usually just remixing it for me and adding a drop of water works. But you can also see this if you use a brush that's maybe too, I don't know, it can happen if you thin your paint too much. It can happen if you're using a really small brush where the paint dries really fast at the tip. If you're not using a lot of moisture in your brush, it can happen that. So, hello, Otter. Yeah, so any of those can be the reason. But yeah, you are running into tiny bits of paint that are drying just a little bit faster than the rest of the paint. So it can either be because your brush is very tiny and you're getting some of that just dry at the tip thing, or it can be that your paint in your palette is like partially drying, which is not going to happen in a wet palette, like, you know. So that would be one solution. Would be switching to a wet palette, and you probably would not have that problem, I would imagine. Depends on what you're painting. All right, so let's see. I think we're looking pretty good on both sides. Let's zoom out here. Yeah. All right, cool. Let's keep going with these struts. These are looking okay. Now I'm going to come in with some layering, and I'm going to lighten up even more the edges up here and clean up some of this stuff. If I have a blend that's not working, like over here, see, I've got some brush strokes. Like here, you can see them. Actually, what this is less brush strokes and more the paint kind of running, because there was a lot of paint on the model here, and the texture is sculpted in this direction. So what it did is it pulled some of my darker pigment with capillary action. It pulled it down and around. So if I want to lose that, same thing happened up here a bit, then I want to come in and layer or glaze. Either. Glazing is technically a type of layering because you're putting wet paint over dry. So, where am I? Oh yeah, struts. So I'm using my medium-sized brush for this. I switched to my Da Vinci Maestro Series 10 size 1 for this because I needed something that was finer to be able to precisely do these little struts. So using a brush without a tip, like the Escoda, would be the wrong choice for this. The struts are also fairly thin, so There we go. You will often be more successful in doing a straight line if you do a long, quick stroke. But when you're trying to do very controlled motions here, sometimes I just do little dashes and just link them together. And it's about stretch time. So I'm going to finish this strut, and then we'll do some stretches. And just so you all know, and I'll be mentioning this periodically throughout the week, I will not be on this coming Monday, Memorial Day. David and I are going down the coast a bit to relax, and so I will be out of town. Y'all will have to wait till Tuesday. Enjoy your Memorial Day. Hopefully you have tasty food and like partying planned. Even if it's partying with a much smaller group of people than you normally would. Although some states you could get away with a big party. Also shout out to Mr. Derek Schubert, who met us for our walk on Land's End on Saturday and who explained to me various plants and flowers, so now I know what a lupin looks like. Lupins are very pretty and inspire me to paint things like indigo blue and yellow. And nasturtiums. I saw my first nasturtium when it wasn't on a food plate. I'm pretty sure I've seen them on food plates. Since they're edible, but nasturtiums in nature. All right, yeah, and you live in England, so it is not Memorial Day for you. I'm sorry, little onion. Kerniko's the same. She's in Scotland. She does not also have that particular holiday. But I will be enjoying having a holiday. You guys get holidays that we don't get, so it's fair. But yeah, we're gonna probably hit some art galleries. I'm excited. Art galleries are nice places to pick up color scheme ideas. Inspiration for painting. Seeing what other artists have done with colors, even if it's on canvas, can give you ideas for stuff you'd like to try. So I highly recommend venturing out to an art gallery or an art show or a art museum at some point in your painting life. And even if you don't like the style of a picture, sometimes the color scheme will speak to you. And you can take a picture and hey, if you're on my Discord, you can come back and say, okay, I want to do this color scheme, but on a miniature. What colors should I use to get close? Or you can use the power palette to get close. And then ask people, kind of get your selection and go, hey, everybody, I'm wanting to do this. Is this about right? Because sometimes the power palette will be a little bit off. And getting some living eyes on your color selections is a good idea. I'm going to get this outside thing. The minute we've got all these struts done, we'll do our stretches. Just want to get all my struts ironed out here. And then we'll do some shading and highlighting on said struts and some evening out on the wings. Mm-hmm. Yeah, David, hey, wet blending goes fast. That's the nice thing about it, right? Yeah, yes, I did see bumblebees on the lupin out at Land's End. So, yes, I would say they do. That's cool that you are growing those flowers, Kerniko. They are very, very pretty. They are flowers I would have in my garden. Yesterday I saw a African iris, which are also pretty common in this area. But they're really cool too. More purple and yellow. You can see my default color scheme as David tends to tease me about it. I definitely am strongly partial to purple and gold. Or purple and yellow. Or purple and orange. Or purple and green. Any of these things. Since you can highlight green and orange with yellow, it's all purple and yellow to me. Weird made-up holidays. Kiriniko, everybody has weird made-up holidays, okay? All right, we've got our struts more or less outlined here. We've got some underside wings that have definitely come together. I am strongly partial to purple. It's true. Irises and lilies in general I really like. The last bouquet that David got me had some beautiful lilies, and I was so happy about them. They were fantastic. So cool looking. And I like orchids. One of my orchids is coming back into flower, which is nice. All right, let's stretch, guys. Let's get our stretches in. Oh, stretching. Yeah. Weird made up holiday, national animal. Yeah, weird made up food, weird made up words. Yeah. Yeah. Hey, the weird national animal is like, I guess it is kind of made up, but unicorns everywhere are crying. Shadow Raven. Alrighty. Let us do some stretches. So if you've been sitting on your rump, or lying on your back, or kneeling on a chair like I have, it's now time to stretch, everyone. Remind your spine that it curves the other way. And to be completely honest there, Shadow Raven, America has plenty of weird made-up food and weird made-up words. So I don't think Scotland has a complete monopoly on that. And our national animal may be like, you know, an actual animal instead of like a mythological creature, but I kind of like the whole mythological creature thing. I always felt like our national animal was pretty boring. Yeah, I don't know. Technically, all words kind of would be made up, wouldn't they, if you went back far enough? Going with the simplest definition of made up. And America's national animal should be a turkey. Yeah. Buzzard. A buzzard with good PR. Alright, I'm going to do my floor stretches and I'll be right back. Alrighty, we are returning. Ben Franklin really pushed for the turkey. He was a smart man. Turkeys are pretty cool. You know, birds in general are cool, though. Did you guys, some of you I know listen to NPR, but they were doing the poll on which animals could you take in a fight. And I learned that the bald eagle is not a badass. Like you should be able to take one in a fight as a human being, as an unarmed human being. Like, I was somewhat disillusioned by that. Although I still think they underrated geese. Geese are nasty. Although a zoologist or a person who actually like works with animals actually wrote in to tell them like where they were incorrect in their assessments. Ooh, wolves that stream. So really it could be somebody's golden retriever on the internet. Although wolves are smarter than dogs, so or at least they have bigger brains. Significantly bigger brains. Yeah, super nasty, but apparently if you can land a solid blow on the body, you can take care of them, Thormel. Because they're birds. They have hollow bones. They really don't weigh very much. So you have to avoid the pointy ripping beak and talons, which can do some serious damage to you. But would you emerge, like, victorious and alive at the end? Unless it got a lucky strike, you know. Well, right. I mean, it was a very silly poll, as Nate Silver put it. It was the Slow News Day poll. On which animals Americans think they can take in a fight. And it was scaled from grizzly bear and, you know, the scary animals all the way down to, like, rat, house cat, goose, you know, small or medium-sized dog, you know, things like that. But as a child, I was traumatized by geese. So I was like, oh, geese are nasty. Don't underestimate the geese. But eagles were in there. Alrighty, so we got this. Let's get our Kraken ink out and do some shading. Then I'll bring up the highlights a little bit down here on the bottom. I'll probably do a mix. Since the bottom of the wing membrane here is lighter, I can go a little lighter with my struts also. We still have to, like, get this gray going on and really marry it to the rest of the model. It was pretty much just people being polled on what they thought they could take in a fight. So probably the most realistic or useful information to get out of it is, like, how do, like, men and women, like, realistically assess their chances in a fight versus X, right? Although, as pointed out also, there were many people, no doubt, answering that not seriously. Like going, oh yeah, I could take a grizzly bear in a fight. Yeah, I'll mark that down. But it was surprising how many people, to me, didn't think they could take, like, a medium-sized dog in a fight. But then I know how to handle dogs, so maybe I have an advantage there. Oh, yeah. Yeah, actually, Derek brought his copy of the Kirill FAQ book to me to look at on Saturday when we went for the walk. It is so worth it. Like, I can't wait to get mine. Like, he did a bang-up job on that. Apparently, it took him, like, a couple of years to write, and I believe it because it's chock full of information. If anything, for all of you, if you get that Kirill book, take it in small sections. There's so much information, it can easily give you information overload. So, like, read it, like, pick a section that you really would like to, like, learn more about, and then, you know, kind of focus on that small section and work with that. Because, oh my gosh, there's so much. Like, he may have written the definitive, like, miniature painting book of our time. Like, I haven't read it yet, all of it. I just skimmed, like, and kind of looked at the sections and how he was organizing things. But there's so much information. It is expensive, but just at a quick look, I would say very worth it. I would say if you are a beginning painter, it is maybe not quite as worth it. Because some of the advanced stuff is not going to be worth it to you yet. But it may be eventually. So, yeah, I mean, it is very info dense, yeah. Oh, yeah, I bet. Deer are strong. So I'm going to get my bigger brush, but I'm going to thin down my paint and kind of do some blending. Just a little bit of layering to darken down these upper struts so that they're dark like they are over here. Yeah, take it in sections. But, I mean, Kirill is so good. He's so good at it. And he's got a great thought process about it. So I'm very much looking forward to it. And he uses a lot of MSP, so a lot of the stuff that he'll talk about and the techniques that he does are very applicable to MSP. Other paint lines too, although for some applications you may need to thin more for some lines than others. But yeah, maybe we'll, since Kirill's such an MSP fan, maybe we'll actually, when I get my copy, maybe we'll, I can find a section that's really interesting for MSP and maybe we can do some stuff on stream. Might have to do it on my own stream. Unless it's a specifically MSP technique. But we'll see. We'll see. I won't get it. I'm getting it for my birthday, so that'll be in June. Yeah, I'm terribly excited. I always like to look at at miniature painting books done by other painters and listen to kind of the feedback that they get, because someday I would like to do a book. And so it's very interesting to me to see how various painters organize the material, you know, what emphasis they put in their book. You know, like, is it more about their philosophy, like Alfonso's book, or is it more about the nuts and bolts of what they do, like Kirill's book? You know, it's and, you know, do they do a really long book, or do they do like a shorter book, like Uraldi's, Alfonso? Is it Alfonso Uraldi's? But his book is relatively short, at least his first one. I don't know if he's done a couple at this point, but the guy who paints for Infinity. But he did a very good job. I mean, he's mostly doing a lot of airbrushing too to start out his models. So that's a good, interesting book for that. All right, so we're using layering to darken down these top struts. And because our Kraken ink is dark and our mahogany brown is dark, I don't have to worry so much about blending it in. I have thinned my Kraken ink down. You can see here that it's very much a kind of a purple wash. It's kind of at that level. Yeah, I really find it interesting to see how the different painters tackle doing a book about their work, right? I guess I have this tendency to naturally deconstruct. I like to kind of not just like look at the book and, you know, any useful information in the book, but how they tackled putting across that information. It's interesting to me. Yeah, totally. It is very large. You're right, Star Wars Geek. Hello, Smallish Sam. It's good to see you back. Yeah. I assume you've been busy. Busy or without internet. Either of those things makes sense. We are doing some, we started out with wet blending and now we're doing some layering to darken down the struts up close to the body of the wing, and we're going to lighten them down at the bottom. I want a little bit of kind of a fade. Since I did a fade with the membranes, I want also a fade with the wing struts. And I also want to use this purple to shade this red so that it makes sense visually. And again, because these colors are so similar, because they're both dark, you really don't need to worry about blending them very much. Just a simple brush stroke is just going to blend it in very nicely because they're close to each other. You have to try a lot less. It's a lot less hard to blend something when the colors are close to each other on the grayscale measure. Value scale. So two colors that are only marginally like darker or lighter than each other will be very easy to blend visually. And the more difference you have between your two colors, the harder it is to blend, and the more you'll have to thin your paint and build up layers of it. Or you can just do a half and half mix of the two to bridge. Some painters like to start out doing a lot of different layers so that it's easier for the blending itself is easier, even if it takes them a little longer because they have a lot more layers to apply. So that's something you can consider. So see how this is still very flat. It has no shading. And this is starting to get more definition and be more interesting. It has a couple of different colors in it now. Just kind of bringing it in. Mostly I'm kind of shading either on undersides of bulk of muscles or bones, or to kind of outline like little scale bits. Hold on, Max. I missed the first. Yeah, broken up. I think with a big book like Kirill's, Max, you definitely need to break it up. You need to break it up into small chunks. You've got to make it accessible. You definitely want to break it into sections so people can find the information that they're looking for quickly. It also helps you when you're writing it. To break up your subject matter into something that makes sense to you. Alright, so again, pretty flat over here, much more interesting over here. Now this is the underside of the wyvern, this belly area, so we can make everything a bit darker. We definitely don't need to highlight everything up to the same level. The wings are different just because we've got light shining through them, what is called transmitted light, so we can definitely go for that lighter effect. But like, I will not highlight up very much on these red scales. Just a little bit, because you would get some bounced light. But in general, the strong light isn't shining down here, so you don't need to do a lot of work down here. Just a little bit. Just a little bit to show that you actually did it. So I'm mixing a little bit of my burnt orange in with my mahogany. Just to lighten that mahogany up just a little bit so I can bring out a couple little details here. I have never released a wild animal from anything except the tiny bat that I released from Halloween spiderweb netting. I think he was a fruit bat. He complained at us in very high-pitched terms while we were doing it. He was clearly not pleased. But I think he got away okay when we released him. Or her. There. Just a little bit of highlighting just to bring out the little details here. Now, if we look at this, you always want to kind of keep in mind, you know, also the pose. So I haven't put this guy in the base yet because I want to still be able to get easily at the underside. But if we look at it, this claw is definitely curved over, and this claw is actually facing up a bit. So there's going to be a bit of light on this paw coming down. So we can tackle that. We've tackled it a little bit already, but we could even tackle it a little bit more. But the lighter we go, the more we have to thin our paint to get good results. Pearlescent Skin using like, okay, so first you have to define pearlescent. Do you mean color shift, Magnetic Gumby? Because then you should get some interference paint. Or use something like Sophie Silver over the top. Like you can use... well, you need to define what exactly you're trying to do. So I can't answer your question unless you tell me what you mean by pearlescent. Like, pearls are just white metallic. So, like, you could just glaze pearl white 9100 over whatever your skin tone is. But if you're looking at color shift, that's a whole different question. And then you have to think about what color. Then you're going to have to use a color shift paint. And you could probably use something like Turbo Dork. You'd have to determine what color you wanted. You can also just paint it on, make it a painted effect like NMM, which I did on my vampire that I was working on stream here. Monique. But that's a lot harder to pull off, depending on your level of painting. Hey, we have a raid? Wait, I missed it. Where's my Maharoon raid? Hey, I see you now. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for the raid, Maharoon. We're working on our wings here. I was just highlighting up this paw because it's actually raised up a little bit more than the other paw. The other paw is mostly in shadow, kind of cupped and facing down, but this one's kind of coming up like he's going to claw whatever's above him or her. So this is our Wyvern that we're working on today. Down here. We were wet blending the wings earlier, and then I was doing a little bit of shading and highlighting on the struts and paws. Yeah, I mean, the easy way, Magnetic Gumby, is to get interference paint, or color shift paint. So it really depends. Like, when you if you're going to get a pearlescent color on, like, by using, like, color, like I did on the vampire, it's a lot harder. And you have to use, like, pink over green or orange over blue or yellow over purple to do it. And that's difficult. So I don't know what level you're at, so I can't recommend it. You could try it and see if you like it. But if your friend just wants, like, if you want to use, like, an actual metallic to get that effect, then I would say Turbo Dork has, like, a pastel pink green one that might work really well. And if you only put one layer on, I mean, the color shift paints on the market are notorious for not covering, like having to build up several coats to get a big shift. But if you're doing something like skin, you don't want a big shift. You don't want it to look like metal. So a single coat can give you a very interesting, subtle effect. Yeah, Turbo Dork. But you could also just use, like I did, you can go watch the Monique. It's Small World Monique is the model. It's the chibi. And when we did the skin tones. So you could find that in the archive. If you are good at layering, then my method will give you good results. It'll be more subtle than using a metallic. You could also do it with Sophie Silver. It's one of the real decent use for Sophie Silver, which is a special edition Reaper color that's kind of an iridescent blue sheen. And so you could do that also. And that's a Reaper color. I don't know if it's available in any form right now, or if you might already have a copy from past promotions. A lot of people like it, so we've done it in like holiday color sets and stuff. Yeah, so I would say if the Reaper colors that Sophie Silver is a good option, depending on what your underlying color is. But if you're going with like a skin tone, then putting a blue sheen over it can give you that weird kind of otherworldly kind of look. And you can always build a kind of a silk satin like custom metallic by using something with pearl white. Hold on, guys. I gotta get in focus here. Oh, that did not focus. It likes to focus on other things. There it is. Ah! So let's take our base off. I just wanted that for reference for a second so I could judge how much highlight. So then we got this paw highlighted up a bit more because it's more facing the light. I'm pretty good there. I was just saying for the raiders and newer people here that when you're painting stuff that's on the underside of the figure, you really don't have to highlight it nearly as much. And this Wyvern is kind of crouched over. Rawr. But there would still be some light reflecting up at his or her underside from the surrounding terrain. So you can highlight a little. You just end up not needing to highlight nearly as much. Like, the undersides of things do have highlights. Like, you can see details. So they've got under the highlights and shadows. They're just not as profound and as high contrast as when you have a direct light source. So there. I do want to fix that upper membrane. Yeah, that's about right, Valandar. You cannot be held responsible for other people's bad color sense. Like, it's like, what can I say? This character has bad fashion sense, and I am not responsible. Alright, so we've got a decent level of highlighting on that. I did want to touch up those wings. It is true that D&D players often do not have the best color sense. This is why it can be hard to do commissions for D&D characters. They give you the color scheme and you're like, what? Huh? Oh, wow. Yeah. Well, you know, that actually, bright pink and medium purple and, blonde hair. They haven't been watching my streams, have they? I did an adventure that way, but I also put a bunch of muck on her. I also am in the process of dirtying her up a lot. So that rogue and your friend's character have something in common, but her pink and purple finery didn't survive the dungeon very well, or the wilderness. And that's a rogue or an assassin too, and I still chose to paint her those colors. And I have all the colors that you have defined. You know, I have the neon green daggers. And my character manages to stealth. See, I just tell myself she's just that good. Like, that's it. Like, the level of stealth you have to build to actually stealth in that outfit is impressive. You should be scared, not laughing. You'll be laughing until she, like, sticks a dagger in your gizzard, and then you won't be laughing anymore. Yeah, no, it's so true, Max, because these people, like, they're not artists, they're not into fashion, they're just like, I want these colors. And I mean, that looks good on my rogue assassin chick. You know, the colors look fine, but it's like, I mean, maybe it would have been, are you sure? I don't think she'll be able to stealth in that. Rogues at least have the advantage that they get skill in stealth, so, you know, you can get good enough at stealth to overcome your fashion sense, eventually. Oh, okay, Twistome, I'm sorry you have a migraine. Yeah, this orange is probably not good for your migraine. Yeah, Rhonda is supposed to start her stream today. Isn't it at, like, 2 p.m. USA Central? Or isn't that it? Reaper? Yes, 2 p.m. USA Central Time. Thank you, Quindy. Good, good. Yeah, that should be fun. I'm looking forward to Rhonda's show. I think I have a coaching, so I won't be able to watch it, but I hope it goes well. You guys definitely tell me tomorrow how it went. Just getting a little bit of color up here to bring out those little wing membranes over there. we'll do the same thing on this side. Once again, I say I'm going to work on the underside, and I haven't gotten to it yet. But I want to set up all this. I decided I want the wings set up because that'll let me better see how I can blend the gray area, into the rest of the model. I think I'm going to end up using quite a bit of orange and the Osirian sand and just getting the wolf gray really in the shadows. Yeah, if you do edge highlights on it, it'll look mechanical, Valandar. Like, as if it was a robotic arm. There are ways to do it, but it would involve more work, right? And if you want to do that work, is up to you. When you're painting for D&D, sometimes it's just a question mark. Does it look good enough that they like it? And then you just go with it. Let's bring our Kraken ink in and start shading this other side like we did this side. Using my bubble wrap so my paint doesn't rub off on the other side of the wing. Hee hee. There. Yeah, we're pretty good. I don't care if I have to do a couple of touch-ups, but I don't want big rub-off. Oh. Oh dear. Yeah, well, then it's whatever. Then just highlight and shade normally, I guess. People will come up with the weirdest concepts. But it's their character, and if they love it, awesome. But yeah, D&D players usually aren't thinking in terms of what will look good. They're thinking of, they've got a picture in their head. And they don't really see the whole picture until you paint the mini and put it in front of them. And even then, they may love it, Because there are people with terrible fashion sense on this planet. Well, I mean, but if they're just giving you one basic color that they want, like they're like, well, my god's color is, dark blue. That's easy. Like, making something like that look good is not too difficult. But when they give you a really elaborate color scheme like Valandar is talking about, it can be very difficult. And you still want it to look good for them, right? That's why you're like, are you sure? Do the shading out here. Half elk, warlock, Merid. Oh no. Oh no. Yeah. Yeah, it looks good in their head, that doesn't translate into miniature very well. Max Styles has it. Alrighty. Get the shading in here. And it's about almost time to stop. Just in time, we got at least our shading in on this side. And there's going to have a lot of shadow on the underside of this claw. It's kind of cupped. So a darker shadow than this one. Any kobolds? Gold Osborne, not for a very long time. Not for a very long time. I did goblins more recently. But, not kobolds. Although, I like kobolds a lot. But, yeah. I think the last kobolds I did were back when we had Legendary Encounter pre-paints, and I painted the prototypes for those for Reaper. That was a long time ago. I tend to like to paint bigger stuff on stream because it shows up better. Or at least, moderate 35 millimeter. And kobolds tend to be pretty tiny when they're sculpted. Why did you need color? Do you have a color question, or are you just curious because you like kobolds? I think the next monsters I have, we did a rock troll, and I think I've got an ogre. There's an ogre candidate and a minotaur that I have coming up as far as humanoid monsters. There we go. Shadows looking pretty good here. I'm going to recap what we did today. We got off to a little bit of a late start, but we talked about paint chemistry and chemical reactions and why you shouldn't mix sealer and primer. We talked about wet blending and the type of brush you want to use and how to get more mileage out of your brush if it's not keeping a point when you're working with thinned paint. Talked about different types of palettes and what they're good for. We talked about layering and glazing a bit. We talked about how you don't want to take on a bald eagle in a fight, but if you did, you probably could win. Oh, okay. Yeah, I haven't because I tend to paint bigger stuff. Just tends to show up a little bit better on a stream. It's the same reason we haven't really done any like gnomes or halflings. It's because the details can be so tiny and fine that it's more difficult to do on the stream. And I will say that, there's a reason my name tends to be is Painting Big, my new name on my own stream, because I definitely enjoy painting bigger stuff more than little stuff these days. But I like kobolds. Kobolds are one of my favorite races to use in D&D. Meaning you missed half of the show. If you want to listen to a lot of boring paint chemistry, that was probably the highlight. But if you have chemistry class flashbacks, I would advise against it. Because, as mentioned, although interesting, it is not necessarily a necessary bit of information for you as a painter. Though it is interesting. So, if you are curious, if you're chemistry curious, by all means, go watch it. And yeah, there we go. So we've darkened up the tops of our struts. We've got a nice shadow on the paw there. We highlighted this paw. We've got this going on really well. I have to highlight the oranges near the bottom here. I have to decide whether I went dark with the claws up here. I have to decide if I'm going to go dark with the claws over the whole thing. Yeah, we can do a little bit more highlighting next time, and we can finally force ourselves to tackle the underside of Ye Wyvern here. We also haven't really done much highlighting up on the top side yet. We've done a lot on the wings because, if you recall, wings are my least favorite thing to paint. So getting them out of the way early is a good idea. So we did blending. Blending! Much blending. And there's our stripy wings on the top. And we did get a little bit of rub off, you can see on the top scales here, but not too bad. Not too bad. All right. So... a kobold in a 40k Space Marine. That's funny. All right, Reaper. Who are we raiding today? Thanks for showing up, all you guys. I'll be back tomorrow. Remember, I will be out on Monday. I'm going to try to be here Friday. I should be here Friday. But yeah, we'll be out on next Monday for Memorial Day, as we will not be home. Reaper is searching for a raid. There we go. Ooh. Melancholy. Awesome. Okay, you guys. Thanks for tuning in. Have fun. Tomorrow is half work day. Ooh, fun. That'll be fun. All right, I'll see you guys tomorrow.